Hoops through life. Hoops through life.
Welcome to another episode of Hoops Through Life, a podcast where we discuss the women's basketball collegiate recruiting process and transition from high school to college. I'm your host, Elsbeth Bierman. Our guest today is Coach Melissa Dunne. Melissa played for 4 years at Temple University. She started her coaching career in 2002 as a graduate assistant at Drexel for 1 year before becoming an assistant coach on staff. Melissa has experience as an assistant at Rhode Island and George Washington University and experience as a head coach at Holy Family. She is currently the associate head coach and the director of recruiting at St. Joseph's University. Melissa, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you. I'm excited about this, and I want to thank you for having me. Building this platform for both college athletes and their families who are trying to help them. I think it's just a great thing that you're doing here. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So let's just jump in. What's the first thing you notice about a student athlete? What kind of draws you in?
Yeah, I think the first thing when we're out recruiting is just their athleticism, their build. That's, kind of is like the eye test we talk about of like, what do they look like? How big are they? And then I think from there, it's that skill set too. How well they shoot, how well they dribble, how well they pass. So like just a high level of skill set. I would say those are the immediate first two things. And then there's some things on top of that I think will play a larger part, but just initially, that's the thing that it's going to be like, okay, let me lock it in right here and kind of, see what this player does in their time out on the court. So just advancing past that, I think we talk about just competitiveness and, toughness. So players that are, really hardworking, super competitive on the court, great teammates, like those are the other things that can keep them on the list after that initial.
So that when you say great teammates, what does that look like to you when you're watching them play?
So we'll look at like, do they point to their passer? Do they have good body language? Are they, slapping five with their teammates? How do they react after they make a mistake? Does everybody have to go to them to pick them up, or are they generally pretty well balanced and can get to the next play pretty quickly and pretty resilient in those factors? I think that's really important, for a player to have.
So if you can't quantify this, that's okay too. So when you say like a high level of skill, like dribbling, passing, shooting, all those things, if you were to maybe try to break that down a little bit to something more tangible, what would you say?
I think we're always looking for, we love our guards to have a certain size about them. So, if you can have a 5'10" guard in our league, it's really valuable. But it's not like all encompassing, but those are the things that as you're kind of scanning the court, you're looking at those things. And then I would say from a shooting perspective, like their shooting form, like how well can they knock down open shots? Like, what does that look like? Are they consistent? And then, handling the basketball, especially if it's a guard situation, how well are they with their dominant hand? Do they have some abilities with their non-dominant hand? Are they a good passer, especially if they're a guard? Can they see the floor, attacking the basket, that kind of stuff? Like, do they read lanes well, when to go, when not to go? So those are some items we're looking at. I think more for the post players, like we like for them to have face-up ability if possible. We're always looking at how well they run the floor, how quick they are, how mobile they are. And then, how well they catch the ball, because that's a big part of what they're doing, trying to get position. So those are some of the criteria that we'll go through, but it's really not like a hard checkbox. It's just sort of like, okay, these are the things that we're kind of like observing and kind of getting an idea of where they are with them, like what would they need to develop, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part, right? Because it's not just like a yes or no. It's like more contextual and encompassing of like many different factors. And I know in shooting specifically, like I get questions about highlight film a lot and just like, what should I send? What does it look like? And I'm like, if you're a shooter and you're showing the same footwork every single shot, like that's not super helpful, right? So just being a little bit more dynamic in what you can do on the court from different angles and things like that, I think is always good too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just being able to showcase like the complete skill set if possible. But I know it's hard in a short highlight, but those are the things like, coming off screens and being able to shoot on the move. Like that's a big thing. If you're a shooter, like, can you do that? Like, what does that look like? So that's definitely good advice for them, I think.
And so right now, what like graduating class are you all focused on?
So right now we're hyper focused on our 25s, and we're, aware we're building and have a list for our 26, but that's still evolving. So that's where I would say like our majority, I would say right now 60% on that 25 class, just because this is really when they're getting into decision making time. And, we would have started with this process with them like this time last year, if not sooner. So now we're getting into like most of them have come and done unofficial visits and just trying to get those next pieces in and trying to get them to see where they fit with everything and go and try and get them to get to that decision point because that'll be coming up in the next few months or so.
And so you kind of touched on this. You said they came on your radar. You established that relationship maybe a year, maybe more, longer than a year ago. So like typically, generally, when does a student athlete in your program get on your radar, and then how did they get there?
I think that I would say generally they're on our radar for like 2 to 3 years potentially. And that could be like we know who they are. We're going to watch them in tournaments. In some cases, we're talking to their coaches about them and getting more specifics on them, what kind of kid they are, different items like that. So and typically how they get there is there's a couple different ways. I think the number one way is when we're out at these recruiting tournaments. So in the summertime, we're at a lot of AAU programs. We have, 5 live periods from April until August. So, we have one in an April weekend where the Division I coaches are able to go out, one in May. And then we have a high school live period in June, and then 2 more non-scholastic live periods in July. And then there is actually another thing at the end of the month that we can do. So there's actually another one. But, during that time, we have our current list of, 25s and, 26s that we're following. And then in between that, we're also trying to watch teams at those tournaments and look for new players and kind of see, who might fit, the criteria that we spoke of, like that initial look. And then we go from there, we write them down and we'll do some follow-up. There's a couple other different ways, like occasionally, like not occasionally, but like coaches will also reach out to us and, say, hey, you should take a look at this kid. So that can be really helpful. And we'll definitely go check out kids whose coaches recommend them and try to get a feel for them. But those are the main 2 ways. And then we also try to see all the kids that will send us an email for sure. Highlight films, we're going through that information and trying to get a feel.
So then for you all, think about like if you think about your current roster, what do you think the percentage is of the student athletes that made first contact with you versus you made first contact with them?
That's probably a very low percentage in Division I. Because for the most part, like it's typically we're going out and seeing them and then following them for a bit. It does vary. If I had to say percentage, maybe 20% right now of a kid who made first contact. But yeah, it's typically the other way around. We go out, we see them, we follow up. Once we're able to contact them directly, we can do that. We try to build that relationship, and try to go from there and try to just bring them along the necessary steps for them to feel comfortable with, our university and excited about that. And then obviously feel connected with our staff and with our team. That part's really important.
And so being such a low percentage, but I'm sure you still get a ton of emails just about, student athletes inquiring. How many emails would you say that you get in a day, in a week about from a recruiting perspective?
Yeah, I would say there's probably about 4 or 5 a day that I'm just getting, So, and that doesn't include other coaches on staff. Sometimes they'll include everybody. Sometimes it'll appear that some will just come to me, or sometimes they'll just send them to our head coach. So we kind of vary it by that. I mean, it kind of varies that way.
hmm
And it picks up. It actually really picks up as we're getting into those eval weekends, obviously, because
mhm.
they know we're coming out. So they'll reach out, and that's smart, like, hey, well, I'll be here. I know you'll be here. Like, come, check out my court. And that's really helpful. So we definitely follow up with those items, because any player that's, interested, we want to give them the respect to go see them. And there's definitely a lot of good players that, are reaching out to us. They might not necessarily be a fit for our program, but a lot of them are definitely fits to play college basketball.
And so how would a student athlete know that you're interested in them?
So typically the way it'll work is we'll go see them. If they're younger and we can't contact them directly, we'll write them down. We put an eval. We have a system that we log our prospective student athletes in. Just it's an organizational system that we can keep track. So we'll put them in our system. We'll typically able to send them a questionnaire. So we're not able to send them anything until June 1st at the division level of right after June after their sophomore year is when we can make first contact via email, text, and phone calls. So if we see them before that, we'll put their information in, we'll send them a questionnaire that they can fill out and fill out all their information back. And then we'll touch base with their coach. And then, in some regards, the kid will reach out to us and we're able to like introduce ourselves that way and say, hey, we saw you, but we just can't directly reach out to them. But that can at least start the connection of like, hey, we saw you. We were really impressed. We're excited to continue watching you play and continue to follow your career.
Yeah, so as that relationship is developing, what are the things that you're looking for from that student athlete on and off the court?
So, a good student is always really important. What we want players that are going to take care of their business in the classroom, and really be an example at St. Joe's. So that's really important to us. Someone who's going to take pride in attending, our university, someone who shows mutual interest, and sometimes that part can be, the interesting part, depending on how highly or how large of a volume a player is getting recruited. So just, them continuing to like be engaged and show mutual interest and, want to be recruited by our institution. That's really important. And then constant development off the court. I mean, on the court,
Yeah.
so, we might see you at the end of your freshman year. And that's very exciting, but we're also looking like, hey, are you getting better? Are you growing? Are you not physically growing, but are you growing? Are you evolving as
You
a
must
player during that time?
endlessly grow. You must grow throughout your whole.
Yeah. Be 8 feet, please.
Yeah,
That would be
exactly.
helpful. But, are your skills developing? Again, back to like, how do you interact with your teammates? Like, athletically, how have you evolved? How has your game improved? What things do you do really well? So those are the kind of things that we're continuing to look at and look for.
What are your expectations, or maybe not expectations, but hopes in terms of how communicative the student athlete is, especially since like this relationship starts when, I mean, I know that you all really can't communicate until after a certain point, but
Mhm.
you're watching somebody who's maybe like 14, 15 years old and like trying to project something to when they're 18 years old and they might come to you. So like what are your expectations as far as communication goes?
Yeah, I think that varies from each student athlete. I think we make that first contact and, then we kind of allow them because the phone is so unique right now. So a lot of stuff is like text messaging. Some young people feel much more comfortable texting, but we do like to talk to them on the phone and just generate a rapport. But that's something like, for example, when I make this first contact with the rising juniors in June, that's something we'll talk about. Like, hey, what works for you? Because we have unlimited, we're able to call them whenever we want, text them whenever we want. And very few kids want to be texted every, called every day. That's just not, so we just kind of find a balance there. So it could be like once a week, just check-ins, a couple times a month. I find like, a couple times a month to once a week really is like a good general gauge of a student athlete at that time. So it really can vary from there.
And what do you have? I'm sure you do have like a not spiel, but like you have something you generally say when you're talking to student athletes, especially for the first time when you don't really know each other. Like what kind of questions are you asking them to try to gauge maybe what they're looking for at the next level, their interest level, maybe in St. Joe's? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, in that first call, I try for it to be less like me talking at them. Obviously I want them to understand a little bit about our program, just give them some general, knowledge about our program and our university. It could be, for local kids, they typically know us. If it's, a non-local kid, just kind of making sure they know where we are, what conference we participate in, like, what type of school we are, that kind of basic stuff. And then we'll talk a good amount about like our team, like not nitty gritty of our team, but just kind of how our recent season went and that kind of stuff. But really, I want them to, be able to talk. So I'll, ask them, how their school year is going, things that they're excited about for this next, eval period or, with their AAU team. I'll talk to them about, like a little bit informational stuff about like, okay, so do they have siblings? Like just try to get to know them a little bit in that sense, to just trying to build a rapport. And it's not typically a really long conversation, but just something where we're able to, get a point of contact, get to know them a little bit, let them know that we're interested in building this relationship and that this will be over time. We'll teach them more about, they'll get to learn a little bit more about us and we'll get to learn a little bit more about them. And that's sort of the hope right there.
Hmm. And what role in your mind do their parents have in this process?
I think their parents have a big role. They're probably two of the, biggest influencers that they're going to have. So a lot of times we'll talk directly to the student athlete for the most part. But then we always want to have that relationship with the parents where we can call them or that they feel comfortable in calling us. And that'll vary. So we'll definitely, check in with them, touch base with the parents throughout just to make sure, nothing's getting lost in translation because, they're high school girls, so they have a lot going on and just making sure everybody's on the same page with what everybody's hearing and, making sure the parents know we're interested and, how we, see their daughter and what that looks like and what St. Joe's can do with them and help them in their future.
Hmm. And so kind of going off of that, but maybe not really, but what's the best way for a student athlete to find out what you think of their skills?
I would think a lot of them will ask, like, I think it's good they'll say, what do you think I need to work on? And I think that's always a good question, because then that opens the door for us to, in that situation, I'll talk about, well, these are the things you do really well. Here are some items that I think you can continue to grow with, and try and give them. And I think that's a really smart question because it allows them to figure out, like, what are you watching when you're watching me? Like, are
Hmm.
you really watching? I mean, are you dialed in or are you just at the court? So I think I think the student athletes who ask that are, you can tell that they're doing their research and they're trying to like navigate this process and understand potentially what type of coaches they would be looking to play for. What are the things that we see in them? So I think that's always a good question.
Hmm. And I don't know, tell me what you think about this. So, um, like you want to give advice, you want to help, you want to let them know what you think of their skills, maybe where you see their trajectory going, but at the same time, it's like maybe you're like, oh, I think you would do best working on like shooting or something.
Mhm.
Name any X skill. But it's like maybe they see themselves in a different position. And maybe that's a good thing for them to know, like you said, like, well, this coach sees me going in this direction, but I kind of want to go in this direction. But it's like the balance of knowing who you are as a player versus what might help you be successful at the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's important because I think ultimately we're looking for fit, right? Like I think as a coach, for me, I always tell the players like, this is we want you to be in a great situation. So if I think one thing, but you're more focused on this thing, then this might not be the right fit because this is how we see you and this is where we see you being a strength on the court. So I think that's important to have that conversations because the last thing you want is, you know, to not tell players that and then they come and they're like, well, this is, and then you kind of just
Yeah.
are like
Yeah.
at a standstill. And then, the coaches aren't happy and the players not happy. So I think, being able to have those open conversations and I'll with, a lot of we recruit a lot of versatile players, so it's not as much of I think an issue for us because we try to play positionless at times. I mean, we run sets and we do have post players that will post up but all our post players can also shoot the three. So that and they're mobile, so that helps us. And we don't limit, them to only certain things in a way. So that kind of helps us with recruiting. You're not really closing the door to many conversations because a lot of players, I think what I find is everybody's a guard,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's great. And that's I think that's great. And in some ways they are, but you have to find a style that fits that too, and you can showcase your skills, in positionless basketball anyway, because it's positionless. So
hmm Yeah, and then in that instance, it's more about like maybe your IQ and flexibility and ability to read what's happening on the court, and being able to adapt and be like, oh, somebody's over there. I need to shift over here or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
So I get questions about the recruiting process from parents who have daughters in middle school. Like what advice would you give middle school parents just in regards to maybe what they should be focusing on in the moment when they're in like seventh or eighth grade?
Yeah, I think just allowing your daughters to have fun. I think that's probably the biggest thing. And when I go back to playing AAU, it was really fun. And, I think sometimes there's a lot of trying to get, into the right situation, which I think is important. But I think you just have to, first thing is just make sure that your daughter loves the game and she's doing it because she wants to, and that's what she's really passionate about because basketball is a big time commitment. These parents are committing a lot of time traveling on the road. So I think if they're passionate about it, they love it, they're still having fun, I think they'll naturally continue to work and get better. They'll want to work. And I think that chances are they're going to be seen and things are going to work out well. And then whatever path they take in high school with AAU, that those will present itself when the time is right.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so you're the director of recruiting at St. Joe's. At any given point in time, how many athletes are you kind of juggling to communicate with?
It depends with the classes. But I think we, try to keep our lists pretty tight in a way, and try to build those relationships. So it might be talking to 5 or 6 kids, depending on the positions and stuff like that. I might be communicating with 5 or 6 different kids for a class. And then, we just try to let them know, some players might have, a scholarship offer and they know that, and, just try to let them know where things are at the time with them. And then, just be transparent in the process.
Yeah, that's a pretty tight list.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that would be for me
Per
personally.
Okay, I
Yeah.
got you. I got you.
Yeah. So
So
the other
then,
coaches would have some other people as well. So we kind of divide it out.
mhm.
Yeah.
How does that process work for you all? Like, are you like the first gatekeeper and then you're like you can pass and go to, you know what I mean? Like, how does that process work for you all?
Yeah, I think we try to do it a little bit geographically. I think that sometimes works just with the contacts. Um, and then, everybody's out finding players. So just then navigating that of like making sure, someone's not completely overwhelmed, with
Hmm
you can't work through like 40 kids,
Yeah.
it's just be way too challenging and counterproductive. So it'll start a little bigger when we initially start the class, and then it'll start to streamline down. So, we might have a list of, potentially 40 kids, and then we'll kind of continue to streamline that down. But yeah, so we'll look at that and then we'll kind of have these conversations as a group and then kind of work our list to what they are. And that is something I do just to look and see like, making sure typically I'm pretty aware of the majority of the players, just like that we're looking at. Like I've possibly mostly seen them or know of them or something like that. So, I'm looking at that and just seeing like making sure people are included that should be included and that kind of stuff. And then we kind of just split it by, if somebody saw someone, they can continue with that player on their list too, so kind
Yeah,
of varies.
that makes sense. And so then how does the transfer portal affect your all's recruiting?
It varies by year. So like this past season, we were able to bring in, two graduate transfers that were with us for 1 year. And then currently this year, like we don't have a transfer going into this next year. So I think it's just case by case. And then, part of this recruiting process is building relationships. So as we know, we don't get all the players we recruit. It would be great if we got them all, but
Yeah.
that's just not the reality, right?
Yeah.
Some go to, Power Five schools and, have aspirations of other places or have different needs or fits that sometimes don't always match up with, us at the time. So I think, we try to keep it with a relationship thing. And like, as we look through the portal, during that time that the window's open, who were we recruiting who would now be a potential fit in for our team? Do we have a spot available? Whether, do we have a scholarship available? Which typically we do because over the years, we've kept our roster to about 13 purposefully, just from a management standpoint. So we always do have like one, like a scholarship or two that we could potentially use for it. But I think it just depends, you know, if what position we're looking for, who's available, what relationship we have with them. Um, because sometimes with the transfer portal, like there's players that want to leave places for a reason, and that reason might not always align with the way we play. So that's probably our number one thing in looking at that. And then that relationship, like, was it a player that we had recruited that maybe went to a bigger school and now we can revisit that? Like they kind of got that out of their system and now, they want to play at a level where they can be more of an impact. Like those are the conversations we're having with them.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's less likely for you all to just cruise the transfer portal and be like, oh, that kid looks interesting. Let's reach out to them. It's more so, do we know them? Did we enjoy them? Did they fit what we thought at the time? Let's reestablish a connection and see if it's still there.
Yeah. And like how well we feel they can impact our program. I think when you're looking
Yeah.
for transfers, you know, uh, ideally our recruiting, we're trying to, maintain our level of play every year with our recruiting. So that's like our goal, like maintain or get better.
So, what would you say is like the typical length of time between either first learning about the student athlete and when you offer them a scholarship?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So, like the typical length of time between first learning about a student athlete to when you offer them a scholarship.
I would say probably could be like a year. It just really varies in certain cases. So it could be like a year we'll watch a kid. It sometimes we see them, we want to get them to campus. We want to get to know them a bit before we make an offer to them. So, it could also be, if we're out in April and May and someone's really sensational and then they come to campus, in the summer that we could offer them. So it varies, but I think with the players, like we're pretty aware of, who's like when we're going out and watching these AAU teams, we're kind of seeing them multiple years and kind of watching their development a little bit and then kind of getting into that next step with them.
Hmm. And so I guess what types of, let's say the on the court stuff, great. You checked all the boxes, you're enjoying them, you think they can make an impact. What is the other side of it, that vetting process look like for you all before you offer them a scholarship?
I think again, it's just like kind of getting an idea for who they are. I think we really want to bring, good people into the program. So that's pretty important to us. Like You're saying from, you're saying after what side of the boxes have they
So
checked?
the basketball side, you know
Yeah.
that they can make an impact. Do you think they would fit really well into what you all are doing? Now it's just like, okay, do they mesh with the team? Do they vibe with everybody else? Like, I guess the question is, because I gave the answer because you've said it a couple times. So I guess I'm looking for maybe more so like what types of questions you might ask them, what you're kind of looking for. But I don't know. Let me know what you think about that, or we can just move
Yeah,
on.
no, I mean, I think ideally, is we want to get them on campus and we want to interact with them. We want to interact with their parents. We want to kind of get what their value system is like from a fit. And if they're on campus, if it's very ideal if our players are around because we'll involve them with the unofficial visit, so they can spend a little time like. And our players can maybe talk to the player a little bit and just kind of get a full rapport. Um, but that can vary because there's definitely players we've, offered before they come to campus too. And then we kind of go from there and gauge things as the process evolves. But some things we're asking, like I think we're asking the AAU coaches like what their work ethic is, how much do they love to play the game, how are they with their teammates, getting their vantage point because they work with them every day. Well, the high school coaches too,
Hmm.
so and really trying to get from their support circle like what that looks like, finding out a little bit more about the parents. Hey, what do they like? That kind of stuff. Just so we can get a full picture of who that person is and what their values are and if it aligns with our values as a team.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what types of questions should student athletes and their parents ask when discussing scholarships with the coaching staff?
Oh, I think it's just so like when they're just, what types of questions they should ask. I would say like once you get that, you're talking about after the offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think understanding what the scholarship is, like making sure you have a full understanding of what that looks like, what it includes. I think getting a idea of, who else may have been offered or how does it work from that standpoint? Like, how long do I have this offer? What does it mean if, obviously social media is a big thing. You can see
Hmm.
players are posting all the time. If I see that you offered another player in this position, like, what does that mean for me? Like, I think, just being able to ask those questions so that you have a full understanding and it doesn't leave any confusion on the table. I know for us, like we just try to be fully transparent in the process and try to communicate that stuff. Because as things go, things can change, in the process based on needs, roster needs, our roster changes. Obviously, we didn't have any changes this season besides the graduates, but you can see the general landscape. Our people's rosters are changing very rapidly. So that's going to change some of the needs of teams, as like a little bit more frequently as opposed to what it used to. It used to be able to project out multiple years, and we try to do that, but there's times where unexpected things are going to happen. And it seems to be that that's kind of the trend now. So I think just understanding that part and being able to ask those questions, and just feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, so for that, am I right to assume like a question might be, you're offering this to me now, even you say I have a month, a week, whatever it is, if their roster changes within that time frame, it's like, would you rescind my offer? Like, is
Yeah.
that would that would be a fair question to
Yeah,
ask
that's
somebody?
Yeah, I think those are fair questions because I think you need to know what you're working with. And the offers are very nice offers, and when you total up what a scholarship is, it's a hefty, amount of money. So, it's like if you had $70,000, would you wait to take it?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes, some players have, 10 $70,000 off,
Hmm.
like so, but I think that's just like stuff that allows the prospective student athlete to formulate their own timeline. Like you want to kind of hit check marks as you're going along so that you can, feel comfortable enough with a place by a certain point that you're like, okay, yeah, I've done the due diligence and I feel great about this decision. It's in my, whether it's in, it might be in your gut, or I just need to walk campus one more time. I need to, be with the team. Different items like that, I think are important.
Are there any like skills that you've noticed that's been like maybe lacking or you need to teach a little bit more to the younger players on your team in like the past couple of years?
I would say in general, we really try to focus on the fundamentals. Like, I think that's just always key, to just have a strong foundation. And, some players come in with great ones and, some players definitely need to refine it. But, um, yeah, I just think, passing's always a big thing. Like, how well can you read the floor and make a really accurate pass? Like, that's sort of a skill that sometimes can be a little bit challenging because everything is so score driven here. Everybody's thinking about scoring. Like, even when they're training, they're, working on that. And scoring is certainly important. Like, we are looking at if you can score the basketball, make no question about it, because
Right.
like that is we got to be able to put the ball in the basket to win
Hmm.
games. And so, but yeah, I think just the fundamentals, like, we try to just continue to like work with a baseline and build up from there. So it might be some footwork stuff just to make sure, the way we're approaching the ball on the perimeter, that it's strong, because there's such a different level of physicality when you're going from high school to college.
Hmm.
Um, so just giving them those little nuances that, at the time, I'm sure in some ways might seem tedious to them, but they're kind of going to be the difference makers. Like, so, your passing technique, how you become more accurate, your consistent shooting technique, like, all that kind of stuff. It becomes really, really important. How you set up cuts. So I can't just say there's one thing. But, I think in general, defense is always a challenge at the next level because of the speed and quickness. And then, I think coming from high school to college, you can get away with certain things, like maybe not being at the helpline, all that kind of stuff. But that stuff becomes really, really vital, as you're, going into the collegiate ranks.
Hmm. What's something that is like a common misconception about scholarships or something that a lot of people don't know about scholarships?
I guess that once the offer's out there, that it, just always continues to be that there's not like, that like if that player can stops to grow, like if you're recruiting a kid and and you offer them, that it's just eternally out there for them, forever. Like I think that sometimes that can be a bit of a misconception, because there is like like a timeline for piece for that, and also just reciprocation of, the interest level and that kind of stuff is important. Um, Other than that, another misconception, I'd have to think more on that. I think some people don't necessarily understand that they're renewed yearly.
Hmm.
Um, some people might not have a full explanation of that, and might think it's like once you have it, it's for 4 years for good. And for the most part, like it does work like that, but each year that is renewed. That's a renewed scholarship.
So then how does a student athlete retain that scholarship every year?
Basically, it's like you have to stay eligible is the big thing. And basically just, be a great contributor to the program, in the sense of, you have to show up for practice, do what's asked of you. Those are the items that, obviously you want everybody to go above and beyond, in those circumstances, but yeah, they're renewed each year based on that mutual work ethic, that they're working to get better, and then obviously taking care of everything they need to take care of in the classroom, and then off the court, being able to, be a person of great character and represent the university well. Those are all really important factors.
Yeah, for the most part, it sounds like your scholarship will be renewed as long as you follow the team rules and you're continuing to show commitment and effort towards the program and all of those things, as long as you're not like going rogue and doing something that's against whatever it is that you all are saying that you want to accomplish.
Correct. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty much how it works. I would say that's a pretty accurate like synopsis of it, to be honest with you. And that's, we typically haven't had to, in my time, like there haven't been many circumstances where they weren't renewed. So I
Mhm.
can only speak to what I know.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a last couple questions that I asked all the guests. And so the first one, what book or podcast would you recommend every incoming first year read before their first season begins, and why?
So one of them I think is, well, I have two.
Yeah, please.
One that I think is still really relevant is, obviously Pat Summitt, coaching icon, leader in the game, but her book Reach for the Summit, and she goes through the definite dozen, which is her principles, and as you look through them, they're definitely items that we are still, you know, not following to a T, but they're items that still make a great team. And I think in that book, she talks, I think where it's, a bit older. So it's not, maybe the current players wouldn't recognize some of the names, but, I think they should go back and understand the history of some of the players that came before them, which would be a good idea. But some of the anecdotes and some of the stories she tells, I think, really mirror a lot of the things that they're going to encounter during their time. And she talks a lot about she talks about players' challenges and how she worked with them on their challenges and different situations. And there's a good understanding of the perspective of the player going through the challenge and the perspective of the coach trying to help the player get through the challenge. And that challenge might be like, it's really hard to, with the conditioning or something like that. And I just think that those are all like really valid points. And the other one that I think is a good one, I don't know, do you read the John Gordon books ever?
I actually somebody a previous guest on the podcast recommended of one of his books.
Yeah, so the one that I think is, I mean, he's got a lot that are just translate to, helping somebody, achieve goals in any sort of competitive setting, I think, but the one that always resonates with me is the hard hat. And it's, basically 21 lessons to be a great teammate. And it's a true story about a lacrosse player from Cornell who's actually grew up not too far from where you are. He's from that DMV area.
Hmm.
And he, tragically passed away during his time in college, but it just talks about what a great leader he was. And it kind of talks about the things he did that led by example, and also led in other ways to be a great teammate. And so it's pretty good stuff.
Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
that Pet Summit book, I haven't heard that title in a while. And like when you said it, I was like, oh, I can picture the cover kind of. It makes me
Yeah.
want to like go back and leaf through it a little bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. It's an old one, but a good one.
Yeah, definitely. And like a lot of times things don't change, like the themes and the issues, they don't change. It's just like what does it look like in the world today that we live in today, right? So
Yeah,
very
for
cool.
sure.
So what's something about the recruiting process or transition to college that you believe that other coaches might disagree with?
Um, I think coaches are really collaborative, so I don't know how much we really disagree with things on that note. Um, I think that in general, like when it's probably the biggest transition they're going to make when you come from high school sports to college sports, no matter what level I think you choose. There's a lot required of you, a lot asked of you. I think the percentages of players that go on from high school to college is where it's like 3% when you go through all the levels. So,
Hmm.
it is an exclusive group. So I think that you have to be um, a bit nurturing of them in that process while also being able to um, get them to where they can go. So I think freshmen in general need a bit of extra attention in that area, because it is challenging and it's the first time some of them are coming up against these challenges. So I just think it's important that you build the fabric where they feel comfortable that they feel supported, that they feel that they can have open dialogue, because some of the things that they're going to be feeling, like I said, they need to be able to express that and talk through, and then, understand different perspectives on things, whether it's physical challenges or mental challenges, and those could be being far from home, being close to home, all ranging from different things. So I think that it's just important that, you're kind of looking after them and nurturing them a bit more. I think that's just really important. I don't know if anybody would disagree with it. I would think most people would agree with it. So I don't know how controversial it is,
Yeah, I would hope that most people would agree with that. But I think that's something that's really important for like a first year to understand too, is like the coach does not expect me to behave like a senior, right? Like they are understanding of that this is new and I might need some help. So I think that's really important for them to understand too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And then last but not least, any final words of wisdom?
One thing we always, I know I always try to touch on this with anybody I'm recruiting, is just to remind them, and it kind of goes back to, like, I think your question before about, you know, the seventh and eighth graders, any advice to them, but I think it's like a theme of like, enjoy this time where you're being recruited, because it can be, I think, as we start to talk to players, and again, a lot of the players we're talking to are not just being recruited by us. So they're being pulled in a lot of different directions. And I think there you can sense sometimes, potentially some stress, because it's like a big decision. They have to manage a lot of communication to different coaches. So I always try to remind them, like, hey, enjoy this time. I know sometimes it can feel challenging, or like you don't fully understand everything that's going on, but it's really special time. You've earned this time. Like, you have a gift and a talent. And in our case, the majority of all the players work really hard to do what they're doing. And, it's going to be one of the times where a lot of people are calling you and telling you how great you are, and that's special. And, you're building relationships that, whether or not you go to that school or not, that person might cross paths with you down the line in a different capacity, whether it's in the work world, or a different way. And I think just being aware of that and trying to, take that all in and appreciate what you're doing, and, your work ethic and what you've achieved so far. I think that's just something that is nice for them to have, and to just be able to be still in that moment sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Like whenever I meet with a student athlete and I'm like, have any schools reached out to you? And they say any school, I'm like, that's amazing, right? Because it's like you said, like such a low percentage, just the fact that a coach is acknowledging that they think, your skills are whatever they are is a
Hmm.
big thing and something definitely to be celebrated, like in the moment for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so if anybody wants to keep up with St. Joe's, or if you have any camps coming up, where can they find you? Where can they get that information?
So our camps are all on our website. Click the link to our camps, and we have all of our options for the summer. We have a day camp, for some younger kids, the end of June. And then if you need to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter, Coach Dunne. I believe that's my Twitter handle. So, at Coach Dunne.
All right. All right, cool. Well, Melissa, I appreciate you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Elsabeth. I really appreciate it. This was great. And, I really appreciate the time that we had together.
If you're interested in the St. Joseph's University Day Camp, that starts next week, so June 24th through 28th. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can go ahead and check that out if you're interested. Again, it is next week, June 24th through 28th. Thank you so much for listening. If you're looking for more specific recruiting advice based on your situation, head over to hoopsthroughlife.com today to schedule your free 30-minute strategy session with me. We will discuss where you currently are in the recruiting process, where you want to go, and create a plan to get you there. Again, that's hoopsthroughlife.com, hoopsthroughlife.com. And if you have any questions for me or questions you want me to ask future guests, you can email me at l@hoopsthroughlife.com. That's EL@hoopsthroughlife.com. I look forward to hearing from you soon.